Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Insider. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Jonathan Rigby. Jonathan is the Director of Technology at Expedia Group. Good afternoon, Jonathan.
Hi, good afternoon, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Very welcome. Thanks for coming on the show. I could try and do you an intro, but I'll never do it justice. Could you let the listeners know a little bit about yourself, where you are, and what you're up to right now?
Yeah, sure. So, as you said, I work at Expedia, the sort of travel company. We're a sort of a global sort of business based out of Seattle, but we've got businesses all around the world. I've worked there for nearly 4 years in a sort of management leadership sort of capacity. Before that, various other sort of dev manager type roles, and way back when a long time ago, I was a software developer. So, but that's quite a long time ago. I think now I sort of sometimes say to my team, if they're a bit short on numbers, just give me access to the database. I'll cut you some code. And they were like, no. Yeah, clear of that. So, but I can sort of have that conversation with them.
No, good. I mean, Expedia, from my perspective, really well-renowned business in the technology. So I've always worked within engineering, and I think Expedia Group in general and hotels.com, good reputation for delivering projects the right way and in terms of technology. And I know you hire some really, really good guys. So no, fantastic. Good on you. In terms of, it's a funny one right now, isn't it? I think a lot of my clients are beginning to kind of move back to the office very slowly and surely, not at full capacity, but seem to be giving their engineers or their team the option. Where are you guys at right now?
Yeah, I think it varies very much sort of office to office and country to country, depending on the sort of local sort of rules are and what's permitted. But there is very much a move to go back to the office. But within the parameters of what people feel comfortable with. So the company have sort of come out and sort of said, like a few other sort of tech companies are, that we're opening offices where we can. We think that that's a good thing because we want people to feel comfortable in going back and able to sort of collaborate. But there's no like real compunction in that. There's no sort of you're mandated to go back to the office. If you just don't feel comfortable based on your sort of commute or whatever, we're not going to sort of make you. So just sort of talking about the London office, which is where I'm normally based, that's been open. I think probably it's got like a 25% sort of capacity. So you have to sort of sign up, go through some sort of process, and people have been sort of back in the office, and I think that really works for some people. I think depending on your sort of personal situation. So I personally haven't been back in the office yet, but I hope to do soon in the near future.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think your collaborations. I think something I picked up that you said then that's the really key thing. I think. Given companies and Expedia Group sound no different, the choice is important. I think going into that office environment for somebody who's living in a flat in London is I think I would probably want to do that if I lived in central London myself. I think where I live out in Sussex, I think I probably wouldn't be quite so ready to commute in daily at the moment. But I think it's interesting with the collaboration. I think that everyone in technology, I've said this on a couple of different pods now, we are set up, we can work from home. It took a couple of weeks to adapt, maybe even a month or so, but we managed to work from home. But I think it's that collaboration is key, that problem solving when everyone wants to get in the room and jump on a whiteboard. I think that's the one thing that we miss. But I think that if even if you've got a team of 10 and 25%, at least you've got a couple of people in there, at least it's going to help to some capacity. In terms of Expedia, I hope you don't mind me asking, because obviously Expedia are known as a travel business, and as someone who's supposed to be in Spain twice this month, and I'm not, how's business affected? Do you mind me asking?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it'll be any sort of surprise to everybody listening to know that sort of travel has been hit, probably alongside sort of hospitality, like one of the biggest sort of industries to sort of be hit, and so we've been very much sort of affected sort of by that. But it's really interesting because as sort of things have evolved and sort of changed over the sort of time that lockdown first sort of started, and then various again we're a global company, so different countries have been at different
Yeah.
stages through the time. And what we sort of see is that there's a real desire to travel. I mean, people can't, but there are lots of reasons that people want to go and see family, or just to sort of get that break from the sort of monotony. And so particularly sort of like here in the UK, when the restrictions were eased a little bit such that you could go over and stay overnight somewhere else, we saw a dramatic increase in the number of people who were sort of booking sort of cottages, vacation rentals, that type of thing. I certainly did the same. I was due to go to the US, but the minute that we were able to salvage something from our sort of summer holiday, we went and got a cottage down in Newquay, and we sort of did that. And that's what happened sort of across the board. So yeah, international travel is still sort of challenging, I think, but certainly domestically there is that desire to travel. And I think, when this all sort of settles down, there will definitely be that desire to sort of get back into sort of traveling. So it's almost that itch that we need to sort of scratch.
Absolutely. But do you know what? It's bad. I sound a bit spoilt maybe, but when I think of holiday, I think of a beach, and I think of sunshine, and I think of sangria or whatever it might be. And I think that you're right. This year, I've recently went to Wales on a cycling weekend, and that was over bank holiday in August. And I think that if I was to get away for a long weekend on bank holiday August, I don't think the Brecon Beacons, no disrespect, would have been my first choice in a normal year, but absolutely, I think we use Expedia to book the accommodation that we had over that way. So everybody that I know who would go on holiday every year has gone on some kind of holiday. I think it's I got caught in Ibiza in July. I think Boris gave me 3 hours to get home at one point for the quarantine. But there's people seem to have moved. I think that I don't think Portugal's had. I've known so many people go to Portugal in 1 year, for example, or suddenly everyone's gone to Greece. So I think everyone's just moving. There's a massive desire to get away, isn't it? So I think that your platform is definitely obviously going to keep very, very busy. I'm really glad you come on the show. I think one thing's that I see you're active on socials, and in that respect, I mean by blogs and by talks and by things like this. And I'm always interested in speaking to kind of heads of technology and directors of technology who are out there giving some kind of thought-provoking content to the industry. And that's why I've started this blog myself, this pod myself. Sorry. And I see that you've done a fair amount, haven't you? So you've done a few talks, and you've written some really interesting blogs. As well.
Yeah. So I'd sort of I suppose I probably a long time ago that people sort of started writing sort of blogs, and I was sort of not really sort of down in that sort of space. But then I really sort of thought about what was sort of important, and trying to sort of find avenues to sort of get the way in which I sort of feel, and particularly in areas of sort of tech management, which is sort of an area of that's a sort of a passion for me that I've sort of got into more recently, because and I suppose it's that's been driven from experiences that I've had of working with sort of other sort of tech managers. And I mean, it's quite clear that we know that studies have sort of shown that over 50% of people, the reason that they leave their particular current role is often due to their sort of management. So there's certainly a lot that needs to be sort of done in that sort of space around sort of education, training managers to be good managers. And I think particularly in the sort of technology, that's a key area, because of course you've got people who've come from a sort of a development or technical sort of background. They've maybe spent 3 years doing a computer science degree, and then they've been doing lots of sort of on the job sort of learning. They get to a certain point, and we maybe pivot them in, or they choose to pivot into a more manager role, and all of a sudden they're like sent on their way and sort of said, oh, well, they maybe have a day's sort of management sort of training course, and then they're let off to sort of manage a team. And so it was out of that sort of experience that I sort of thought, well, I'd love to do more in this space, and just not because I think I'm a particular sort of expert, but that I've got some sort of ideas that I wanted to sort of share and just open up sort of dialogue in that space,
Mm.
so that, you know, people can sort of question and sort of challenge ways in which we sort of manage and lead. And it was out of that I suppose that I started sort of blogging. And then after that, the opportunity to sort of speak at sort of conferences was something that I was really sort of keen on doing. I'd attended a few sort of conferences, and maybe it was a bit sort of like blasé, but you sort of sit in the audience and go, oh, I could do that. And then you sort of, the next stage is you put a sort of call for proposal in, and you just sort of stick one in, not thinking that will happen, and then you get this message back sort of saying, we'd love you to speak, and then it suddenly becomes very real. But that whole sort of process was great, and I really sort of enjoyed it, in terms of not just the actual sort of conference and the presenting, but what you get out of it, the fact that then the discussion and dialogue that comes from that. People contact me on LinkedIn, sort of say, oh, I saw your talk on this, I'd like to follow up with a sort of few questions, a few thoughts. And that's just brilliant for just connecting with other people, seeing how different people approach the situation.
Yeah, I think great, so interesting. I've got a few points I was kind of making myself then. I think first of all, I put out a post on LinkedIn last week regards the background of a CTO, and it's kind of a weird one. There's no right or wrong answer. I think I always had the opinion that you had to come from a technical background to be a good CTO, and realistically, of course you have to have technical knowledge, but that the argument is that you can come from more of a leadership and a managerial and a kind of project delivery style path, maybe not with a computer science degree, maybe with an MBA, and empowering a technical lead to look after your technical stuff. And it's like I say, I had some great engagement. At some point, I think some people probably thought, what is this recruiter on about? Like, how come he's kind of calling out what a CTO should be? These guys have been CTOs for years, but that's fine. I think the whole point is that I'm there to kind of open dialogue and have some discussions, because off me putting out a simple post, I actually learned quite a lot. And off the back of, it's interesting when talking about pivoting, coming from an engineering background. So typically, maybe not so much now, but if you come down an engineering route, I can use ThoughtWorks as an example. They're not a customer, I hope they won't get too much trouble. But I used to know lots of guys who are engineers at ThoughtWorks. You hit a bit of a ceiling, and if you want to become, you're very good at your job, but if you want to ultimately earn more money, as you do throughout your career, you had to kind of go down a managerial route, and it was like, really, I don't want to do that. So they started losing a lot of really good people, which was fine for me because I was snapping up these really good guys, and they could go and earn the money being more technical than down the managerial route. But I think that it's important to when you want to go down that path, that you've got, it's not just a business that's kind of open and will take you on training courses, and it's also about your peers and what you can learn from. And that's from talks and the blogs that you do and interaction off the back of LinkedIn. I think that's key. I think that really works. So one of the things I read that you put out that I really liked the thoughts of, the sound of as well, was utilizing your team and playing to your team's strengths.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's something that I suppose sort of arose from a few sort of rather frustrated sort of annual reviews that I actually received from, that classic sort of case of, you sort of sit down at the end of the year and your manager has got various sort of bits of sort of feedback from you, and they sit and they'll go through that and talk about, ways forward. How can we sort of move on? There's a sort of traditional sort of way of doing stuff. And in those sort of sessions, I often sort of got a situation where we would have like, yeah, you've had a good year. You've been working well with your teams. They've really delivered on what we needed to on the roadmap and etc. The team's sort of grown, and that's been sort of positive. But you're when you sort of send out emails, I've got feedback that you're not very detailed. People have to sort of come back and ask sort of more questions. So how can we train you? What can we do to sort of, I suppose, plug that weakness? And we've all got weaknesses. There's all sorts of different areas where, depending on your sort of character, personality type, etc., that you've got some sort of blind spot or whatever. So that's fine, and I've got no objection with that. But what I was frustrated with was this idea that we were then spending all our time focusing on an area of weakness, which, there's good reason why I don't sort of spend sort of time in that, is because my personality type is a different way, and I maybe bring something to the table in areas of strength in a different way. So when I started to sort of conduct my sort of one-to-ones with my team, I would be more on that sort of, okay, well, this is the feedback. These are your areas of strength. How can we really build on that and do more of that? And look, if there was something that was fundamentally a weakness or a development area, we'd sure need to focus on that. If that was something that was stopping you sort of effectively doing your job. So, for example, if there was a manager who had stakeholders and they just were a really poor communicator, when obviously we need to sort of like look at that. But I think it's more engaging, more motivating for people to really instead focus more on your sort of strengths and how do we sort of play into that. So one of that is just sort of making sure that we know what our strengths are, and then sort of trying to work with. So I try and work with a team to sort of say, okay, well, based on the fact that we've got these sort of different strengths, how can we make that work for us as a team? So actually, when you've got a software team, you'll find that people have got strengths in different areas. So why have a rota to sort of facilitate meetings? This is just an example. When you've got somebody who just, when they chair the meeting, they're just really good at getting the best out of people. They make sure that nobody's sort of forgotten. They bring a sort of dialogue to a close in the right way, taking all his opinions, get some good next steps. They're just really strong at that. And by rotating it around the team, just, you'll get some people who are not so strong at that, inevitably. And so are you doing the team a disservice? Are you making poorer decisions as a team because you're trying to do this thing where, well, Tom needs some help sort of facilitating meetings because he's had that feedback. I'm going to give him that opportunity, let him go away and sort of do it. Yeah, that's okay. But are we not getting the best from the team by doing that? And I think that's where I was sort of coming from. And I think that there's something there. And I think, my perception is that people, obviously, if there's an area of strength, they want to do more of it. They want to sort of demonstrate it. So it's just trying to tap into that idea.
So would you say that that's more from a softer point of view then? The reason, what I mean by that is a lot of companies now, and I'm pretty sure Expedia do that, of cross-functional teams, and you don't suddenly become an engineer who's got the DevOps and the testing, and you come from one particular background, and typically working in a team, you'll learn from pairing or whatever it might be, then you'll improve your kind of technical skills. It's not necessarily saying a weakness, but you're improving your kind of technical knowledge. Are you saying that it's because this you play into your strengths more on the lines of kind of like the softing, like you're better at mentoring, you're better at kind of like organizing this and organizing. Is that, again, I always try not to sound stupid when I ask these questions, but do you understand what I mean?
No, I get what you're driving at, and I think it's a really good question because am I sort of saying, therefore, do you have the guy who's really strong at DevOps, just doing the DevOps bit for the team, and the guy who's really strong at architecting doing that part of it? And no, I think you're right. I think it is more on the sort of soft skills in terms of what we bring to the sort of team to help it work together well. I think, you don't want to get down that road, particularly in terms of sort of technical sort of challenges, because otherwise then you've just got one person who can sort out that particular problem, and we want to sort of get away from that. So good point of clarification.
Yeah, no, sure. In terms of the other stuff, have you got is there other stuff that you've got in the pipeline then? Because I'm always interested in hearing what you're saying and what you're talking about.
Yeah, so I think in terms of some of the stuff that we're sort of thinking of, I've got a conference that I'm speaking on in a month's time, and we're focusing a little bit on the topic is sort of what do we do about the skills shortage in sort of technology, a very sort of popular sort of topic, and it's something that always everybody wants to come across, and you as a sort of a recruiter and me as a sort of leader in technology have come across this challenge.
I only have this challenge about this conversation about 10 times a day, to be fair, so that's fine.
So that's what I'm sort of like thinking about, and got a sort of a few ideas. And one thing that I think is a lot's been sort of said about apprenticeships, and I think great stuff that goes on there. We have something at Expedia called a Code Academy, where we open it up I know you said that you're learning sort of Python. So what we do is we have anybody in the business. You might be in a finance team. You might be
Amazing.
in HR. You can come along and you can sort of like learn some different sort of coding sort of skills with a view of maybe, you know, if that goes well and you're really engaged in it, pivoting down the sort of engineering route. So we do a lot of stuff to try internally to try and sort of do that. I think just sort of interestingly out there in the sort of marketplace, I think that there's always this sort of crunch on skills. And I think what the solution might be is going to be a blended approach of all these sort of different things. But I think one of the things that we did was we read a book called, as part of a book club that we did, called The Techie and the Fuzzy. And it was about trying to sort of like solve this sort of challenge whereby you've got people who come from a sort of technical background, and then you've got all the people who did like arts degrees and stuff like that. And actually there's this really big divide going forward, and we're going to need even more sort of tech focused jobs, and how we're going to sort of solve this. And I think the author made a really sort of good point about what are going to be the technical challenges in the future. And they're not going to be maybe just fully the pure technical challenges that we've had in the past. I think with AI and machine learning and that type of thing, we've got challenges around, and we sort of saw it ironically. My son did one of his GCSEs this summer, and of course people were talking about, if you followed that sort of story, about the algorithm that was there to sort of predict the grades for sort of children, and so people just were talking about this sort of algorithm, and we can sort of say, okay, well, it just made it sound like it was some sort of computer generated thing, that there was no sort of real input. And what the author of this particular book was saying, that actually in the future we're going to need people from all sorts of different sort of areas, including those sort of what we wouldn't have considered as a sort of tech role in the past. So people who've got philosophy degrees, people who've got language as a sort of degree. So I think that we will solve that sort of skill shortage in part by the fact that we will sort of diversify in the types of people that we bring into sort of technology. And it won't be that traditional, you've got to have a degree in computer science, which actually makes me wince every time I sort of see that on a job advert, because some of my strongest developers that I've sort of have come from all sorts of different backgrounds, and certainly not necessarily computer science.
One of my old customers, they used to like be so particular about having a degree, and these guys I wasn't able to put forward would just go on, and I just saw their careers escalate and just think, what are you guys doing? To be fair, this is probably like 10 or so years ago. I think the mindset is definitely changing. It's really interesting. Honestly, I'm absolutely loving hearing what you're saying there, because I think that you're absolutely right. I think that it's quite generational. I think that the younger generation seem to be more interested in technology, and I think that there's so many different angles within technology. So I think that they need a lot of support from the government, and as much kind of help from guys like yourself and hopefully myself in terms of putting information and content out there, because it's massive. And I think that bar the Silicon Valley, the UK has more startups, interesting, cool, sexy startups for people to get involved in. So no, I really, really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much for your time. You spoke a little bit about people reaching out to you on LinkedIn previously, with the hesitation that suddenly you're being inundated. Are you open to people dropping a message and following up on any of these questions?
Yeah, because as I said before, one of the key things for me is to be able to have that sort of discussion. I've got some ideas about how things do, from situations around OKRs or even sort of software estimation, and I put those things down on sort of paper. But the really valuable thing, and the thing sort of speaking at conferences, is being able to have that sort of discussion with people who are also trying to wrestle with these same sort of topics.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, really welcome anybody reaching out on particularly LinkedIn. I've got a few articles there. It's a good starting point. So
I think I'm looking forward to, getting back to normality. And I think that off the back of ultimately the network that I've created doing the Insider podcast, I think we'll have to have a meet up. I think we're going to have to do one of your talks. then we'll get some beers and pizzas in and all that jazz. And I think it'll be quite good, because I think that's the whole, what I've learned is, technical leaders coming together and having opinions. I think it's important, and have, which, because that ultimately will manifest in new ideas and stuff, just not from a technology point of view, but from a thought leadership point of view. So really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on the show, and
You're welcome.
look forward to speaking to you soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ben. It's been great.
All the best.
Cheers.